Hi, my name's Nicola Askham and I'm known as the Data Governance Coach. And I'm thrilled to be with you today because I've made it my mission to help as many people as possible be successful with data governance. So joining in events like the Data 2030 Summit is a great opportunity for me to help as many people as possible. So in today's presentation, I'm going to take you through the data governance fundamentals. If you are just starting out in data governance, you might find it very confusing and overwhelming. And if you Google the term data governance, you get thousands of results come back. And I can tell you, some of them are really good and some of them are not so good. So if you don't even know where to start, it can be really bewildering. So I just wanted to spend my time with you today, taking you through some of the fundamentals. So by the end of this presentation, you should have the basics that you know what you actually have to do. So you can actually go and do research and find out the detail on those topics and hopefully find a clear path through. So if we start by looking at the really obvious thing is, what is data governance? Now, this is a term that confuses so many people, and let's be honest, it's not the most exciting sounding discipline, but data governance really is exciting. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about it, and it's really benefit to anybody's organization. It doesn't matter what sector you're in. So what we actually have to do, though, is find a way of describing it. Now, when I first started training and presenting on data governance, I thought, well, I don't need to write a definition of data governance. Far cleverer people than me have written a definition. So I had little Google because, I thought, yeah, I think I've got enough experience. I can work out what's good and bad on the internet. So this was one of the first ones I came across. And you can see it's quite wordy, and we start going data governance, refers to the overall management of, and you know what? I'm getting bored and I haven't even got to the end of the first sentence. This sounds like just a lot of words. And, it's not a bad definition if you look at it, but it's not great. It just doesn't make you want to do it, does it? If you went and said to one of your business users, you were going to do this and repeated the words you can see in front of you word for word, what do you think their reaction's going to be? I can give you a clue. It's unlikely to be, that sounds fabulous, where do I sign up? More likely to be, that just sounds really boring, tenuous, and something else I have to do on top of everything else I do. So although it's technically correct, I decided that I was going to discard that one. So I thought, let's have another little look and see what I can find. And I was beginning to think that perhaps there was just too many words in the first definition. So I came across this one, which is much shorter. It's definitely succinct. It's just a cross-functional discipline of managing, improving, monitoring, maintaining, and protecting data. Now, I don't particularly like the protecting data word, and you'll find out why on the next slide. But it's kind of all right. It kind of explains what data governance is. But if you think back to the question I asked you just a minute ago, is would you feel comfortable describing it like that to a business user? And if yes, that's great. Please go ahead, use this definition. But if you still don't think that's going to make them get excited, then I think, perhaps we have to discard that one too. And I came to this conclusion that actually, I did need to write my own definition. And what I will share with you on the next slide is the definition I came up with. Now, you may be a bit disappointed if you're looking at me to answer the what is data governance, because what I have discovered in 18 years of experience now is if you describe what data governance is, as you can see on this slide, people get bored, they get switched off, or they think it is just a big to-do list and they don't want to do it. So I soon learned, and I learned the hard way, that actually what you have to do is explain to people why they should do data governance. So how I describe data governance when I'm selling it to people now is it's all about proactively managing your data to support your business achieve its strategy and vision. Because if you were doing this for any other reason, you're doing it for best practices, because I say so, all these things are not useful. So you might make some headway, but sooner or later, somebody's going to go, yeah, I've got other things to do. I'm focusing on delivering my objectives that are going to help our organization achieve its strategy. And your data governance will get stopped. So what you have to do is make sure you're always focusing on the data that your company needs in order to achieve its strategy and vision. If you are doing that, you will get people's interest, because senior stakeholders will be tasked with delivering the strategy and vision. And if you can explain to them by helping you manage, understand, and improve your data that you're going to help them do that, you're going to be their new best friend. So I recommend explaining the why data governance before you worry about the what. So the other thing I need to talk about before we get into a bit more detail about data governance is what it's not. Now, it's really sad that we have to do this, but people use data governance terms so interchangeably with some of the terms you can see on the screen here. And I just wanted to spend a minute explaining these items. So data protection, you will have heard of GDPR. It's a European data protection directive, but it's applicable globally wherever you've got data in EU citizens. A lot of other countries are coming up with their own data protection regulations now. They're up in the ante and they're using GDPR as a gold standard. So it's a good thing, but this is all about protecting the personal data we hold on people in our organizations. Now, to do data protection, you really could do with a good data governance foundation. It really helps and makes meeting some of these requirements a lot easier. But it's just suffice to say that data protection and data governance are very different disciplines, and you often have, or usually have, different experts supporting each. So if you're just starting data governance and you're being asked to do data protection as well, as long as you're being given access to somebody that also has that expertise, that's fine. But just be very clear and aware that they are different data management disciplines. Now, data retention is often confused with data governance as well. This is how long we must hold data or can't hold it any longer for before it has to be deleted. And I think if you have put in place data owners, as you hopefully will do if you do data governance, you will have the right people in place to make decisions on data retention. So having data governance in place helps you do data retention. Now, records management is another one that comes up a lot. Now, this tends to be looking at documents, files, records. So as you can see from the picture, in the old days, they would have been real paper in filing cabinets. Now we're always talking about our SharePoint, our Teams site. These are records. These are documents with lots of data in. Now, they don't get covered by data governance because we're talking about the raw building blocks of data, but the same principles apply. Finally, I just wanted to mention Big Brother. Now, when I'm helping clients do data governance, sooner or later, somebody will accuse me of being Big Brother, and I'm going to stand looking over their shoulder at everything they do and all the data they create. And, I always go out of my way to say that's not the case at all. That is not what data governance is all about. Data governance is not about the data governance team policing everybody else's data. This is about changing the mindset and the culture of the business users so they care about their data. And the data governance team just support the business users so that they have good quality data when they need it. So we don't have a lot of time in this presentation, so I just wanted to give you an idea or a flavor of what a data governance framework is made up of. Now, you can see a triangle on the screen, and that's basically my methodology that I take my clients through and we go through on my training course. But as you can see, of the 3 core things that I think are absolutely vital for good data governance, the framework is one of them. So let's have a little look at the framework. Now, I break a framework down into 3 things. It fits on a triangle, which helps, but actually I try to really simplify data governance. You can overly complicate this and it makes it so hard to implement and be successful. So I just recommend simplicity. So let's make our framework up of 3 things. I start with a policy, I have some processes and roles and responsibilities, and that is your foundation for good data governance. So let's have a look at each of these in turn. So if we talk about the policy, this is simply the what you're going to do. So having a policy is really vital. I didn't have one for the first few attempts I ever did at data governance. And then I realized if you have a corporate policy that mandates doing data governance, you've got a very clear message to your users that data is managed as an asset and is taken seriously in your organization. Without a policy in place, you're kind of doing it on a best endeavors basis. You're trying to influence people and you're trying to make sure they keep doing this. And that's going to be really hard if you don't have a formal document in place. So you're probably sitting there thinking, yeah, that's all very well, Nicola, but what should a data policy cover? In fact, one of my coaching clients asked me the very same question earlier today. So I should be able to answer that one fairly easily. So what should it cover? Well, the roles and responsibilities. What roles and responsibilities are you going to have? You don't need to do detailed job descriptions in your policy, but you can list them out and maybe have 2 or 3 bullets to explain what that role is going to be responsible for. You can explain when data quality standards are going to be applicable, because you can't have data quality standards on all of your data. You have a lot of data in your organization, I am sure, and it's not going to be useful or helpful to be monitoring the quality of everything. So we need to explain in our policy, how do we know which data needs data quality standards? And that's usually going to be the most critical data to your organization. You might want to mention how we're going to measure that data quality. Now, I wouldn't always put these in a policy, but particularly if you work in a regulated industry, it's quite a good thing to do. So if you have a regulator that is asking you to put in place data governance, to describe in your policy how you're going to measure the data quality is really, really useful. And I mean things like this in terms of, data accuracy, data validity, data completeness. Now, next thing I would also list in my policy is the processes. So there are a number of different processes that you can implement as part of data governance, and we will look at them shortly. But you might not be wanting to do all of them. And going back to what I said earlier, do what you need to do. So I would actually say, decide what your organization needs to focus on right now, and only put in place those processes, and only demand that they are implemented and followed in your data policy. And then finally, I'd put scope. Now, I've kind of already hinted at the fact you can't put data governance in place over everything, and you wouldn't want to. But even taking that into account, even the data you do want to put data governance in place on, it's going to be too much to do all in one go. So I always recommend people implementing data governance incrementally. So that means when you first have a data governance policy, it's unlikely to be covering all the data that it will do in, say, 2-3 years' time. So you would use your policy to determine the scope. So you could be saying this is just over customer data or just over product data, or you might limit scope by function. So you could say we're only doing this for HR, which is also, I suppose, a domain and a function. But you use your policy to determine the scope and detail the scope. So keep moving on. I'm aware we're going quickly, but I just want to give you some basics and still have time for questions at the end. So if we look at processes, I just wanted to give you a flavor of the kind of processes that you might be thinking of having if you're doing data governance. So you are going to have data quality reporting. Probably not a big surprise, since we've just talked about measuring data quality and detailing that in the policy. So, you can't just produce reports and expect things to happen. You have to have a process. So you will have to have a process for agreeing the data quality rules that the reports are run on in the first place. And you'll have to have processes with how often are reports produced, who do they go to, what happens. Because if you just send somebody some reports because you've created them and you're feeling really excited about them, I can guarantee you the person who receives them will not get excited about them. So we need a process that says they're sent to the data stewards who are responsible for checking them and perhaps fixing anything that doesn't meet the standards. So, that's the kind of process we need. Now, one really important process that I think everybody should have is a data quality issue management process, because I've already said several times now, you can't put data governance over everything. It's not going to be useful. You don't want to tie your business up in knots so much that they can't actually get their work done. You should be enabling them to get it done better by managing your data better. So if we can't or don't want to put data quality reporting on all our data, we need to provide a way for business users to get issues fixed that they come across. So a data quality issue management process doesn't have to be complicated. It shouldn't be complicated, but you need a central way of reporting issues and making sure that the right people are involved in identifying the root cause and fixing it. Now, if you're doing data governance, you may also be doing master data management in your organization. If you're doing master data management, you're going to need some more detailed data governance processes. Now, all the things I'm going to discuss now are things that you should be doing, even if you aren't doing master data management. But because you're doing it at a much higher level of granularity, I don't get het up on having detailed documented processes for them. But they're the same kind of things that you need to be thinking about. But when you get down to doing it for master data management, you need to be thinking much more granular and think of things about agreeing ownership of attributes, perhaps defining the attributes, having data definitions in place, having a process for what happens if you want to amend an attribute or even retire or delete an attribute. So these are all really, really important things that you need to do. And if you don't do good data governance processes on an MDM implementation, it will go wrong. I'm sorry to tell you this, but this is true. And then finally, I don't often document it as a formal process, but it is good practice to make sure that you have a trigger, whether it's a process or some other way, to regularly review and update your data governance framework. As I've said, you need to be doing it iteratively. And as part of doing it iteratively, what you need to do is to check that your current data governance framework is still the right one for the scope of the data that you're now covering. And also your business will have moved on. You might have merged with another organization, or you might have scaled back in certain areas. And you need to be considering whether your data governance framework is still the right one for you. So finally, in the last few minutes, I just wanted to have a quick look at roles and responsibilities. Now, if you don't have defined roles and responsibilities, everybody will think it is you on the data governance team that are responsible for doing everything. And it doesn't work like that. It only works if business people are involved in this. So a quick look at the roles and responsibilities. We have data owners. These are really key for your data governance initiative. Doesn't matter what you call them. If data owners doesn't work, don't call them that. But you need some senior people who are accountable for the quality of one or more data sets. And they're the ones that have got the authority and hopefully the budget and resources to make differences to that data, make decisions about it, and make changes to it if necessary. Now, if they're really, really senior, they are not going to probably understand the detail of the data or really probably have the time and inclination to get their hands dirty and sorting it out. So I always encourage my data owners to appoint one or more data stewards who are almost like their subject matter expert in that data. And they're responsible for doing everything that the data owner is accountable for, really. So this just makes sure that the work actually gets done. Now, the next two roles are really important because you'll have a small number of data owners, a slightly larger number of data stewards, but I think it's fair to say that nearly everyone in your organization either produces data or uses data. And it's really important that we give everybody responsibility for data, because you can't have a handful of people in the organization thinking about data and everybody else ignoring it. So if you produce data in your role, you are responsible for creating it in accordance to the requirements. And if you're a consumer, you don't get to just sit there in your ivory tower and moan about the data producers. You're responsible for defining your data requirements and what makes it good enough. So the data quality standards. Now, I quite often have people say, what about IT? These are all business people you're talking about. So yes, I do think IT has a role. I tend to call that data custodian, but I don't think they own the data. But what they are responsible for doing is maintaining data on their systems in accordance with the business requirements. So I mean by that, the data owner. So IT doesn't decide how to transform your data or how to aggregate it. It only does that on instructions from the business. And then finally, none of this would happen if you didn't have central support. So I've put data governance manager there. That could be a team. You could call it a data quality manager, but somebody needs to sit centrally supporting all of these roles, but in particular the data owners and the data stewards, and making sure that everything happens. Now, if I was doing this face to face, which I would far prefer to be doing, normally at this point, somebody in the room would say to me, what about the chief data officer role? Why didn't you have it on there? So the reason I don't have it as a data governance role is, the chief data officer should be responsible for data governance in an overarching manner, but they are not a new role that didn't exist before you had data governance. Hopefully you have a chief data officer, and they have a much wider remit than data governance, although data governance is part of that. So I would say if you have a chief data officer, fabulous. Data governance team should definitely be reporting to them, and they should be your champion, your sponsor of this work. But I don't expect them to do anything other than champion and sponsor it for you. They don't own the data in the way that a data owner would do. But if you don't have a chief data officer, don't despair. I have helped many, many clients over the years implement data governance very successfully without a chief data officer. What you do need is a senior sponsor who will champion and support you, but they don't have to have the job title chief data officer. They just have to be somebody who gets this and will really support your cause. So That brings us to the end. That has been a bit of a whistle stop, but I just wanted to make sure that I finished on time because that gives us some time to answer questions. So head on over to the question box and submit them on the app, and I will answer as many as I can in the time we have. And if anybody wants to connect with me or have any other questions afterwards, please feel free to connect with me in any of the ways you can see on the screen now.